You're listening to On Shifting Ground from Commonwealth Club World Affairs and KQED. I'm Ray Suarez. Last April, writers from Los Angeles to New York stepped away from their computers and stepped onto the picket line. The Writers Guild of America was joined by members of the SAG-AFTRA union a few months later, and the strikes effectively shut down Tinseltown. The labor disputes forced a deeper cultural conversation about the role of artificial intelligence in the arts and how it may, very soon, be used to replace writers, actors, and perhaps the whole industry. This isn't just a Hollywood story, because AI is already threatening white-collar workers across several industries. Pew recently reported 1 in 5 American workers have jobs that will be aided or replaced by AI. To leaders in Silicon Valley, AI is just the latest innovation in a never-ending quest to, quote, make our lives better. But can we trust the Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs? Are we freely handing over our data to people to make us into their next great product? To answer these questions, I turn to an opinionated, tenacious reporter who's followed all things digital since the 90s. She's covered Jobs, Musk, Zuckerberg, and the latest tech guru, Sam Altman of OpenAI. And she's perhaps best positioned to speak to the psyche of Silicon Valley's biggest players. Kara Swisher is the host of the podcast On with Kara Swisher and the co-host of the Pivot podcast with Scott Galloway, both distributed by New York Magazine. She's also a regular panelist on CNN's The Chris Wallace Show. She was the co-founder and editor-at-large of Recode, host of Recode Decode, and co-executive producer of the Code Conference. She was a former contributing opinion writer for the New York Times and host of its Sway podcast, and also worked for a long time for the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. Burn Book is her third book. Kara Swisher, welcome to On Shifting Ground.
Thanks, Ray. I sound old. I've had a lot of jobs.
No, not old, just productive.
Productive, okay,
The book is dishy, it's funny, and I got to tell you, at times, really worrying.
Yeah.
Should readers worry? Has something been loosed into the world that is frantically writing a story that we don't really have an ending for yet?
Well, you just talked about generative AI. Yes, it's actually doing that right now. I think one of the things that this book is about is my journey to watch, having great hopes for this. And I think I started off calling it like a Star Trek story where things turn out well and it turns into a Star Wars story, which is not such a happy story. If you really take that apart and the mythology around that, evil does prevail, bad people do win. And so my whole premise is that Paul Virilio quote, which is when you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck. We've had too many shipwrecks and not enough ships, I think, in terms of what it could be. And the power is grounded in people who are unaccountable, which for someone like me, unaccountable power and unlimited money is a real problem in this world.
Yeah, quite a combination. You know, I talked to a lot of the people who make it onto your pages over the years, and because I'm not a beat reporter, got the distinct sense that I was being condescended to. Whenever I expressed the slightest bit of skepticism about grand claims,
Ray,
about utopian claims, it was either implied that I just don't get it, when honestly I felt that I did, and that was the real problem.
Yeah.
I was assured there were new rules or no rules, or that part of their job was to cause disarray and let others worry about the details. They were smart, talented, creative, even visionary, but kind of amoral too.
Well, I think that what they think is that they think they're magicians, or we let them be magicians, right? And they're so rich, they must know better. And I think they think wealth bestows intelligence or wisdom on them. I think we don't question their decision-making that they make just on the top of their heads, and usually in their self-interest, and it's typically economic self-interest. And we get dazzled by the things they give us until you start to take it apart. The American public paid for the internet, just FYI. The taxpayer did. It was invented because of government programs, right? This data is ours that is on it, but they eat it freely and then vomit it back up to us and charge us for a fee, for doing it, either advertising or stealing our identities. And they use our identities to do other things. And it's just, sometimes it's very explicit. Like when I had the argument with the Google founders about the book scanning, I was like, did you buy that IP? Well, why should we? Information needs to be free. I said, well, someone paid for it, and it wasn't you. And so they had an attitude that they were here to bring us this great wisdom and everything else, when in fact, it just was a business. That's what I was trying to get. You wouldn't have like a Wall Street person come up to you, right, and go, I'm here to help you build community. They're like, I'm here to make money. Thank you. And I appreciate that. Or a pharmaceutical executive. Every now and then they do those commercials, or BP does Beyond Petroleum. But they're selling gas. They're selling financial advice or whatever. They're selling something. These guys are just businesses. And my first line of the book, pretty much, you don't even have to read past it if you don't want to, but essentially it was capitalism after all. In the end, that's what it was.
It was capitalism, yet capitalism with some really weird elements.
That's right.
There were people who sort of looked me right in the eye and assured me that eventually, with volume, you could build a business out of selling dollar bills for 90 cents. And when I wouldn't buy in on the con, I was sort of dismissed as someone who didn't get it. And you were there for all of that, from before the nuttiness through the nuttiness.
Right. The problem is there's so much great stuff, right? There's so much, it's sort of like insulting electricity. Oddly enough, Thomas Edison was a little bit like this, was very like, it's all, if you really read up on some of these early inventors, they also had to be a bit of a jazz hands kind of personality. And some of it is profound. The changes that we've made right before the COVID, when it was starting, I said, boy, these tech companies, we're going to depend on them for everything going forward. And for the most part, it accelerated trends in commerce, trends in office work, trends in finance, everything, everywhere it was, except for education, which needs to be in person, like it turned out, as it turned out. What's astonishing is how impactful how we've all been changed by it. And by the way, in our brains too, just the way we use these devices, and how little they have had to pay the price for any of the damage, whether it's self-esteem of young girls or young men being pulled down a rat hole of conspiracy theories, or the radicalization of people and the isolation of people between and among each other. Now, I'm not blaming them for everything. January 6th, for example, I'm not blaming them for January 6th, but there's certainly, I call them handmaidens to sedition. Like it didn't help that the unfettered ability to put information that was inaccurate on these platforms didn't lead to the warping of the American mind.
But they won't cop to that tremendous power at the sort of hinge points when it's important for them to concede that there's something out there that really has to be watched carefully. No. They do this thing, the English call it po-faced. It's a sort of innocent disingenuousess.
What, me?
Where it's kind of, who, me?
Yeah.
And they get away with it.
Well, it's more than that. It was really interesting because, I write a lot about Mark Zuckerberg, who I think is very earnest, by the way. I'm not going to ascribe villainy to him. People like to, but I just won't do it because I don't think it's true. I think it's much more complex than that. But when he was in Congress the other day, and I think it was Tom Cotton made him look at all the parents with the pictures of their kids who had gotten hurt on social media, using social media or in some fashion. He looked at them, and I could see his face was sort of like, oh, my God, right? Oh, my God. And except out of his mouth came not, I'm so sorry for anything I've done to contribute to this, which would have been the appropriate thing to say. He said, I'm so sorry what was done to you. There's no active person. Who did it? What was it that was done? Whose fault was it? And again, it's not just ascribing blame. It's that all it would have taken was, if I've done anything to cause this, I am so sorry. And I have. You know what I mean? And I get it. I get what you're telling me. But they can't. And he, to me, exemplifies it because they're, at one hand, very powerful people. And on the other, pretending that they have no power when they're the richest and most powerful people on the planet in the history of mankind. In the history of mankind.
But that's the key moment in this, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's become quite apparent to anybody who's paying the slightest bit of attention that they have amassed tremendous amounts of, you name it, information, money, power, reach, influence, the ability, as you mentioned earlier, to sort of rewire our sense of how to get through the day. Aren't we too late in the timeline for them to do that disingenuous thing where
Yes.
they say, look, what people do on our platforms is up to them and we have nothing to do with that? Seems like it's late for that.
Yeah, it is. They like to sort of abuse the First Amendment. I'm always like, wow, that's not really what it says. And there's actually an interesting court case, and I happen to be on tech side in this one coming up with the Supreme Court, which is about what should they be responsible for and what should the government force them to do. I've never been a proponent of the government deciding this, right? I do think there's other laws we can put into place that have nothing to do. They take the First Amendment and they weaponize that against us, right? Saying, and every now and then they'll say, free speech, free speech, free speech. And I'm like, the First Amendment says government shall make no law. It doesn't mean you have to be irresponsible, And of course, then you get into the debates on what they should take down, what they shouldn't take down. But they abrogate the responsibility to even consider it because they're publishing companies that pretend that they have no responsibility. And in that case, why are they riding on our rails? Why are they, cigarette manufacturers have responsibility. Broadcast companies have responsibility. Newspapers can be sued for libel. These people, the laws are such that you can't even sue them for the most part. And antitrust doesn't address it because it hasn't been updated in a zillion years, right? And so everything is in their favor. And then they act like victims. I would be in conversations with Mark, for example. And again, he's a very earnest person. I don't want to confuse the person with his decision-making, but he would talk about things like the community and all of us together will decide. And I'd always be like, got it. Okay, like that idea. But why do you control the whole thing then? Why are you unfireable because of the way Meta is configured? He's a king. He's a king. I'm like, if you really believe in community, why don't we all get to actually decide versus just you? Because ultimately you just get to decide. And so they often do things like that as if they're one of us. Remember those celebrities are just like us? They're not just like us. They are not just like us. And we don't have the power they do, and neither does our government. Not in algorithmic transparency, not in privacy. We've not passed a privacy bill. There's no liability. You can't be sued. Can you imagine? It's just, if Donald Trump says he could walk down Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and get away with it, I don't think he could actually in that regard. They can. They can get away with it, which is really amazing.
I really didn't shoot that person.
Yes,
I don't know what you're talking about.
No, guns kill people, right? Oh, okay. Sure.
Part of it, I'm glad you brought up that we're just like you thing. Mm-hmm. Because as I was reading the book, I was thinking, yeah, we're just like you. When we decide to buy an island, we have such trouble deciding which island to buy. There are so many of them. Mm-hmm. You had a front seat for a lot of this. As you mentioned, you knew some of them before they were household names. Mm-hmm. A front seat for this tremendous transformation in American life. And you got to know those people in a way much more intimately than most reporters that are sort of do this equivalent of bump and run. And, I've been doing that my whole life. You're in their face for the moments that you're in your face, and then you move on. Did you have any inkling in the early mid-90s of where we were going to be by 2024?
I did understand the wealth creation, I think, way before other people. And I was very entranced by the idea, the power of it. I had studied this in college, communications and propaganda, by the way, jointly. It was so resonant of the Gutenberg Bible or the printing press or the TV. It was so resonant, except supercharged. And so I did recognize that early. At the same time, it was really interesting. Everyone's like, why didn't you work for them? Why didn't you make a ton of money? And some days I'm like, oh, that 100 million would be nice right now. But I turned down a lot of jobs there, which I found really interesting. I happened to like what I was doing. But you could see that their power was growing. It wasn't very hard to anticipate that they would have a stranglehold on media. That was something media just missed completely. And I kept going, hey, The calls coming from inside the building, like, these people are not your friends. I would say that over and over to media companies. They will own you. They're not interested in media. I'm like, they don't care. They're the Borg. They're interested in everything, whether it's insurance or healthcare or cars or whatever. And now you see them all in all those sectors, right? Why wouldn't they want to grow there? Because it's all about data. Anything that it has to do about data, they want to eat it. And so they will.
Has this industry managed to dance away from accountability in part because the aging men and women of Congress don't really understand what they're dealing with or who they're dealing with?
Right. Look, that has changed. The Biden administration put out a very sharp executive order around generative AI or AI, artificial intelligence. Look, they regulate airlines. They regulate banks, much more complex. They regulate insurance companies. Now, not perfectly, but they certainly have their hands around it, right, on some level. They regulate everything, and it's quite complex. They can regulate it. They don't need to be experts. I think what's happened is they didn't regulate it because they were deeply in love with it. And I put this on the Obama administration. We had quite a back and forth, President Obama and I, because I was like, you are just bear hugging these people. And it's like bear hugging the robber barons. What are you doing? Because they were in love with the concept of it and the fleece wear and the comfortable pants or whatever. I don't know. And the money. And so they just neglected just because they look like stuffed animals doesn't mean they're not dangerous, right? They're not powerful. They're not able to get what they want. And what started to happen relatively recently was this anti-government sense from them, because that was always there, by the way. That's not a new. Bill Gates used to insult the government to me all the time. They don't know, we're the innovators, blah, blah, blah. Neglecting to point out that the government was the first government to land on the moon, or on and on and on, and invented the internet, FYI. And that got really kind of bizarre because, you look at someone like Elon Musk. Tesla was saved by a government loan, right? He has space contracts that help him, his businesses. They all have benefited from the largesse of the U.S. taxpayer. And yet they suddenly, once they got powerful, it was all about them and never about the rest of everybody else. Now they presume to think they can run everything.
The old saw, and I love that this industry is now so old that it's an old saw, that if something's free, you're the product.
That's correct, yeah.
Has never been more true than it is today, and people are still voluntarily or semi-voluntarily surrendering their lives.
You're addicted to it, one, and two, you can't not have it to work. It is integral. It's like saying, I'm not going to go with this electricity thing. Like,
I'm going to make my own.
I just don't want to be on the electrical grid. You can't not use it. You cannot have a job today without it involving the tech industry. It is a necessity. Then it's also your entertainment now, and it's becoming addictive on top of it. You have to have it to exist.
Is anybody looking out for the common Joe? Is anybody saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe there's a better way to not give your whole life away to these guys?
Well, we have to look to our regulators. We have to pass laws around privacy, around algorithmic transparency. We're at another major juncture with artificial general intelligence. We have to put guardrails in place, safety guardrails. We've got to say, this is ours and you can't take it. We have to have privacy guidelines.
Well, this is the same con all over again. When I hear people gush about AI,
I like
and
AI,
I think,
FYI.
I find it'll probably end up being both useful and horrifying.
That's right.
In equal measure. But you think, I want to take people by the lapels and say, they've invented nothing. They think nothing. They know nothing. They just go out into the world where things are known and invented and created and scrape it all off and give it back to you as if they've invented it.
They have invented some things. They have invented the tools to do so. And it's really, the most troubling about it, artificial general intelligence to me, is that it is so, you've seen these new Sora things from OpenAI, the videos. You put in a cat dancing by the light of the moon, and the video is astonishing. And one of the things I make at the end of this book is, I'm getting older, it's getting better, right? Like the beginning of the internet, if you looked at the first Yahoo or whatever you were using, It was terrible. And before that, it was even worse. It gets better and better and smarter and smarter and smarter. And we get older and older and older. That's really how it goes, and decline. It will be like, if you look at some of this video stuff right now, last year they had some video of Will Smith eating spaghetti, and it was really stupid and looked terrible. And everyone was like, Kara, it's not going to win. It looks terrible. I go, that's not what it's going to look like. It's going to look like Will Smith eating spaghetti.
Oh, no, in a year it's going to look, more like Will Smith than Will Smith does. And that's part of the problem. They just
released it again, and it looks even better. But you can't look at it and not go, it's going to do a lot of stuff. So where do we as humans fit in? Where is the creativity, which is necessary? It's not very creative. That's damn true. But where do we fit in? And what structures can we put in place, not to necessarily hinder it, but protect us and also open the gates for new things for humans to do, right? Or if we're not going to work as much, what does that look like? And how do we account for that?
But that's part of the sell. Part of the way I'm going to accept AI, I guess the theory goes, is that, oh, don't worry.
Remove the drudgery.
Here, you've been a reporter most of your adult life. You know that stuff that you hate to do, sifting through thousands of documents looking for this and that? Worry not. We'll do that, and that'll leave you free to be creative. Oh, no, it won't. It'll eventually get rid of me.
Mm-hmm,
I mean,
maybe.
The only consolation is that I'm so close to retirement.
You'll be dead. That's what I always say. When I give speeches, I'm always like, everyone's like, oh, we're all worried. I said, don't worry, you'll be dead. It doesn't matter. It doesn't apply to you. You'll be fine. But, there are some amazing things like this cancer. I think they're going to solve cancer using these technologies, help solve cancer. Gene folding, astonishing. Climate change tech, there is so much to be done using technology and around climate change and data. So many answers we can't see that it will be able to see. That's the kind of thing you're like, why can't we lean into that? It's not going to be perfection. It's just not. Like, look, there's a big controversy about autonomous vehicles. We will all be in autonomous vehicles someday, and they are better, and they are less dangerous, and they're more energy efficient. And yes, some of them stop in the middle of the intersection right now when a fire truck is there, but it won't tomorrow, and it won't next year, and human beings will always suck at driving. Always. Never. That never changes. And so you have to sort of lean into the good parts of it. Shall we save energy? Shall we have less accidents, needless accidents? Shall we figure out new ways to transport ourselves? Yes. That's a big yes.
I will admit that every time I see an AI-generated image with two people chummily with their arms around each other, and there's a fifth arm in the picture, I'm comforted. Every time I see a celebrity with six fingers, I'm sort of reassured that we're not quite there yet. But
are you biased against six fingers? What are you, anti-finger person? Go ahead, sorry.
And not only is there a critical national election coming here, but around the world,
right.
A sizable chunk of the world's voting population will be heading to the polls in 2024.
That's correct.
And there are possibilities for supercharging lies, for increasing confusion and disinformation.
Yes.
All midwifed by artificial intelligence, and I don't know if they're being taken seriously enough.
My hope is that people will figure it out, and that young people particularly, I have a lot of kids, I have 4 kids, but my older kids really are very cognizant of this stuff. I don't think they're as easily fooled as we are, right? I think they're very comfortable understanding, just as we did understand television wasn't going to make us stupid. They're very cognizant of that. That said, the person who alerted me to all this was Maria Ressa, who in the Philippines, who is a wonderful person. She won the Nobel Peace Prize, who said to me, like, Facebook is messing this country up and it's coming to you. And look what they're doing. And she sent me data, and it was so astonishing. And she couldn't get Facebook to pay attention to it at the time. She was 100% right. And she's never been more worried about that issue, of the ability of authoritarians to use this to manipulate populations. Don't be fooled about people like trying to bar the internet. Authoritarians love the internet. It's a tool of repression. But it also could be a tool of expression and freedom. That's what I thought it was, which is why I call it a tech love story, because it could be used for such astonishing ability to connect people. And instead, because of profits, growth, and malevolent players, we're getting all the downsides and not nearly enough of the upsides of what it could be.
So, like clockwork, somebody from Facebook is summoned to Capitol Hill, and they're told, look, Facebook is being used to sick people on the Rohingya who are fleeing their villages and crossing international borders, and they're using Facebook to do it. What are you going to do? And that's sort of where it ends. There's no restraint on the part of these companies that are being used in this way, and there's nobody forcing them to make
Well,
sure this
I have
stuff
two
doesn't
things:
happen.
regulation and liability. It takes care of a lot of sins, right? And I think the inability to sue these people, the inability for our government to regulate even on the most basic level about privacy, data transparency, algorithmic transparency, antitrust laws, that's on us and our elected officials. Us not pressing them and them not doing anything about it and being creature to the lobbyists and such. We have tools to control them. We've done it before. We did it with AT&T. We did it with the robber barons. We did it with Standard Oil. We have done this before. So there's no reason we can't do it again. There's absolutely, except they're richer and more powerful than ever before. And that's the problem.
The missing ingredient seems to be the will to do it, however.
Because we love their stuff. Like, everybody liked gas, but everybody really likes online, and they cannot live without it, right? A lot of the things that came before us was stuff that wasn't as powerful. This goes right into the human brain, crawls down your brain stem, and occupies you. It's necessary, it's addictive, and it's ubiquitous.
In the course of the book, you tell us kind of a rollicking story, getting us through the last 30 years, and you drop us off at the doorstep of today. Do you, in the final analysis, think that we, the collective we, our governments, our regulators, societies, will take the measure of this very powerful, very influential industry and save it from its own worst impulses?
I do think we have the wherewithal to do so. I do think there's a lot of people. This is not everyone in the industry is an evil person. It's not. There's all these, I have a whole chapter of people I like who are taking it seriously, who do understand with great power comes great responsibility. What I'd like for them to understand is they don't get to pick, right? Like, we live in a democracy. Unaccountable billionaires, nice or not, should not have the ability to tell the rest of us how to deal with things. They shouldn't have a decision-making about pornography or the self-esteem of young girls or addiction or radicalization. If they wander into this area, then they better get ready to be regulated. And I don't mean regulated because they hate that. They love to attack that word because we're so innovative. We don't need, where we're going, we don't need any wheels. Remember that from Back to the Future? Well, they don't need roads. Yeah. When we're going, you know what? We need roads. We need guidelines. We need all kinds of things. And they better get used to it or it's going to be bad for everybody. Now, unfortunately, they all have escape pods, right? They're going to New Zealand or another planet or whatever. But one of the things I remember is one time I was talking to them about income inequality, which I thought was getting really out of control, like how rich they are. They are obscenely wealthy, these people. And I said, you better do something about income inequality or you are going to have to armor plate your Tesla. And when I said it, when it came out of my mouth, for a second, I thought, oh my God, they want to armor plate their Teslas. They'd love to do that. And they would. Too many of them would, right? And that's my great worry, is that it loses the idea that we are in this together and that as flawed as we are the greatest democracy on earth. Like, we are the greatest experiment. And if we can be done in by kindness or non-kindness of billionaires, we are screwed in so many ways.
Hey, man, depending on how much armor plate you put on, it really wrecks your range.
Yeah, I know, right? Welcome to Cybertruck, right? Oh, God.
Kara Swisher is the author of Burn Book. Thanks for joining us on Shifting Ground.
Thank you, Ray. I'm a huge fan, as you know. You do amazing work over the years.
Kara Swisher is speaking live at the Commonwealth Club this Thursday, March 7th. For tickets, go to the website, commonwealthclub.org. You've been listening to On Shifting Ground, produced in partnership with KQED, with funding from listeners like you. Today's episode was produced by Sienna Barnes. It was mixed and mastered by Matteo Schimpf. Additional production and engineering were provided by Rob Spate. KQED's Jim Bennett is our technical supervisor. Jared Spord is our executive producer. Philip Yun is co-CEO of Commonwealth Club World Affairs. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ray Suarez. Thanks for listening.